Welcome everyone. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where this broadcast finds you. Great to see some familiar names and faces coming into our virtual room here, and to see some new names and faces as well. This is great. Our group is growing as we speak. So I've disabled the wait room, so anyone coming in a little bit later can join us as they arrive. And again, it's good to see some familiar names and faces, and some new folks joining us as well. Les, glad you're here. Good to have you here with us. And Kevin is here. Good to see you, Kevin. John is here as well. John H., good to see you. Kind of scrolling through the list here to see who else we might have the honor of being with us today. Oh yeah, I see some other names. That's great. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. We've got a couple of wonderful presenters today, and just want to welcome you all to our behavioral health webinar series. As many of you who have attended these before might know, we usually have these on Wednesdays, so we switched it up a little bit, and we're trying it on a Monday to get a good way to get our week started. We have this monthly series ongoing, and this month and next month we'll have two speakers. Jim Wikel and Jessica Carroll will be presenting on the topic you see there on your screen. Today is part one of peer support in Indian country, indigenizing peer support. And this is, as I said, the first segment. Jim Wikel will be leading this conversation. Jessica will also be contributing, and we're hoping, Jim and I and Jessica were talking before we came on, we're hoping to be able to open the floor up for some discussion and interaction with all of you. Your feedback and comments are really important to this type of webinar. So happy to have you here. I'm going to go through a couple of introductory slides, and then I'm going to turn the floor over to our speakers today. And we have until the top of the second hour today. So if we utilize all of that time, that's fantastic. We're hoping to have some time though at the end and throughout the course of the webinar today to take questions. So utilize that chat box or your hand raise feature, or just be a rebel and unmute yourself and jump right in there. I know Jim, is said that he wants to encourage that, and I'm sure he'll remind you all of that as well. So I'm just going to go through a few introductory slides. My name is Steve Steiny. I'm one of the managers here at the American Indian Alaska Native Addiction Technology Transfer Center. I manage the addictions portion of our department and work with fantastic consultants and advisory council members like Jim, and I've also recently met Jessica through Jim, so happy to have them here, and always appreciate Jim's guidance and patience with me in working on projects like this. So just a couple introductory slides. Those of you that have attended some of our sessions through our center know that this event is brought to you by the National American Indian Alaska Native Addiction Technology Transfer Center. We are located at the University of Iowa. I am broadcasting to you live from the University of Iowa College of Public Health here on campus. The sun is shining a little bit today, so it feels like spring might be approaching, but you never know. We are part of a larger national ATTC network made up of 10 regional centers, a national Hispanic and Latinx center, and a ATTC network coordinating office located at the University of Missouri. This project, as many of you know, is supported and funded by SAMHSA. The content of today's presentation is developed by the presenters, and the opinions and topics discussed today do not necessarily reflect the views or policies of SAMHSA, HHS, or the National American Indian Alaska Native, ATC. Again, those of you that have attended some of our events know that following today's event, we will reach out to you via email. We will include any slides, PDF copies of the slides today. I'll talk with Jim and Jessica about what we can share with all of you. And there'll be a link to the recording of today's webinar as well that you could share with a colleague or friend, coworker, someone that wasn't able to attend today's session. We are going to offer 2 CEUs that are NADAC accredited CEUs that you can apply to your licensure or certification in your respective state. We also will have a link to a short survey. You don't have to fill out the survey, but we'd sure appreciate hearing back from you. We've added a couple of short answer questions to this survey to really get some feedback from you in your own words. This survey can't be linked to you in any way personally, and you can skip any questions that you would like, but we'd love to hear back from you. I'll post a link to that survey as well in the chat box as we get closer to wrapping up today's session. So glad you're here. Before we get started, I know we're gathered here virtually today, but we wanted to take just a few moments to acknowledge the land and pay respect to the indigenous nations whose homelands were forcibly taken and inhabited. Please take a moment to read this land acknowledgement, which was created by 3 former members of our team, Ella and Keely Driscoll and Mr. Sean Bear from the Meskwaki and Winnebago nations, respectively. Thank you. Well, without further ado, I want to introduce today's speakers. We have here, as I mentioned, Jessica Carroll and Jim Wikel. Jessica has a master's degree in counseling psychology from the Graduate Center of Education and Counseling at Lewis and Clark College in Portland, Oregon. She also has her BA in psychology from Portland State. I recently met Jessica and really have enjoyed working with her for the short time that I have. I'm really happy to have her here today. I'll let her talk a little bit more about herself, but happy to have her here with us today. And Jim Wikel is here. I've known Jim now for some time. We got introduced through some virtual events as a result of the pandemic. Jim is a certified peer recovery specialist, and I'm going to let him talk more about his background as I introduce him and Jessica for today's event. But Jim is a colleague, and I also consider him a good friend. So really happy to have you both here. I want to just thank you so much for taking the time to put this presentation together and to be with us here today. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Jim and Jessica, and while Jim is introducing himself and setting us up for today's event, I'm going to get Jim, I'll get your slides ready, so you just let me know when. Thank you.
Okay. In regards to introductions, I'm going to defer to Jessica and let her go first.
All right, thanks, Jim. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jessica Carroll, citizen of the Osage Nation, the Washashi in Oklahoma. I come to you today as a person with lived experience. I started out as a peer support specialist over a decade ago, and found myself in administration and supervision, and have since moved on to the state of Oregon, where I'm a manager of a program that distributes hundreds of millions of dollars to organizations to provide recovery services across Oregon. As a person with lived experience, I think it's really important to destigmatize our pasts and understand that there is no ceiling to what we can do. So I just really appreciate being here, and I appreciate you all. Jim.
Thank you, Jessica. I'm going to say Niawaskano, Swagwego, and Cayuga. That means greetings, everyone. I'm glad you're all here, and I'm grateful for your well-being. My English name is Jim Wikel, and I am in long-term recovery from addiction, and also I have had to navigate various mental health challenges along the way. For me, they kind of go together. And as was stated in the intro slide, I'm from the Seneca-Cayuga Nation of Oklahoma, and I'm from the Wolf Clan because that's from my mother's side. We're matrilineal. My Indian name is Hano Nago Ha'is. It means his mind is made up. And a little bit about my journey. As I said, I'm in long-term recovery, but I really didn't get into peer recovery until about 2015 when I was in Oklahoma. I went to Oklahoma in 2013. In 2015, I was offered a position as a peer support specialist for a community mental health agency in Northeast Oklahoma. Happens to be in the town where my mother is from and where my tribe is headquartered. And I was 25 years sober at the time, had done a lot of work in recovery, but I still had this underlying nagging sense of something's really wrong with me. And my mother was Native, but it didn't get talked about a lot in our house. Later on, I discovered that was due to her boarding school experiences and the experiences of my grandfather, also in boarding school. And I was, like I said, 25 years sober. I'd done a lot of work, but I was still angry a lot, prone to depression. And when I got to Oklahoma, my auntie said I should go talk to this fellow in our tribe who is one of the ceremonial leaders, and he also teaches the language. And I threw myself into that, and that's where I discovered the missing piece. And I'll share more of that story of how I learned to apply that in my work as a peer support specialist. But that is basically my journey. And my journey is like a long time ago, a fella told me, when you give yourself up to the journey, it just takes you where it takes you. And so right now I am in Salem, Oregon. Had no intentions of being in Salem, Oregon a little over a year ago, believe me. But anyway, I am on the territory of the Kalapuya peoples, who are part of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde. And I do work as a peer support specialist, lead peer support. I'm not really into titles or hierarchy, but I am a lead peer support specialist for a tribal organization here. So good to see you all. Thank you. All righty, I guess I should talk more, huh? Which those of you that know me know that I don't have any problem doing that. But so I decided to call this, at first I was going to call it decolonizing peer support. But then I realized we can't really decolonize inherently colonized structures and institutions and places. Rather, by bringing our ways of being, our way of life into the work we do, I think the more appropriate term would be indigenizing those spaces. And it's my experience, even working in Native organizations, that many times they are inherently colonized. due to having to work within the Western clinical and corporate structures. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about, and I hope other people, if I say something that somebody doesn't agree with, that's great. We just don't agree. I think it's great when we don't agree. That stimulates conversation and discussion and learning and healing, actually. So please feel free to raise your hand and say, I think you're wrong, if you want to, or whatever. But I also want to encourage Jessica, my colleague here, to jump in with her insights as well. So next slide, please, Steve. All right, there is basically, I do want to acknowledge some folks that have helped me along the way. I say Yawagoa and Cayuga, that basically means big, huge thank you. And one person who's been instrumental in my journey of peer support is named Jill Amos. At one time, when I got into the field, I guess you'd say, actually, she's the one that trained me. And she was coordinator of peer support services for the Oklahoma Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services. And she and another fellow named Brendan Ryan, who I did not mention here. Brendan made his journey a few years ago, but he was very, very instrumental in that. And Jill and Brendan developed the current peer recovery support specialist training manual that they're using in Oklahoma. And Jill and the department down there graciously allowed me to shamelessly plagiarize their handbook. So I want to say I don't really have an original thought in my head too. But the other people I want to acknowledge are the Southern Plains Tribal Health Board. At the time, I at one time worked for a tribal behavioral health department in Oklahoma. And at that time, peer support amongst tribal organizations in Oklahoma was just getting off the ground. And myself and my dear friend and colleague, another person I want to acknowledge, her name is Andrea Alexander. We're peer support specialists at this organization. And we have a lot of help along the way from the Southern Plains Tribal Health Board and something, actually, this is where I met Jessica, something called the Indian Country Peer Echo. And it's basically just a huge support network for those of us doing peer work in tribal communities. And so the Southern Plains had asked Andrea and I and a few of the other peer supporters there in Oklahoma if we would help them develop at that time, it was called a peer support toolkit, which has since grown into a handbook. And so I was allowed to use part of that. And also beginning this month, Southern Plains and the Oklahoma Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services is rolling out a Native specific peer support training for the Native peer supporters in Oklahoma. We're supposed to get one of those going in Oregon soon, I hear. I'm not sure exactly when. Maybe Jessica knows more. Anyway, I did want to acknowledge the people, and including Jessica, who's on this call, who has been very instrumental in my journey. So next slide, please. That's just a picture, obviously, but that represents my views in the work that we do in Indian country, whether we're peer supporters or therapists or counselors or case managers or community health workers. I really believe in my own experience that culture is the key to healing in our communities. And so this is a little thing I use. I facilitate a group at where I work. And this is something that I use in one of those groups. So next slide, please. Okay, this is where I want to start to encourage insights and people, especially your experience. I'm sure there are people here with us today who have a lot of valuable experience to share. And I'm not where I'm at because I figured it all out on my own. So please feel free to jump in. But what does culturally relevant peer services? What exactly is that? I guess it's helpful to look at the role of peer support and the values that drive peer support. It's, peer support isn't it. First of all, it is person driven, meaning that the individual peer, and I call the people that I work with and serve, I don't call them clients. I certainly don't call them consumers. That to me, that is the epitome of Western corporate driven behavioral health care. It means if they're the consumer, I must be the producer, and of course the Western society values us by how much we produce and consume. And so I call the people that I serve peers because that's what they are. And relatives, that's a good one. And actually, I have used that at times but I like that, relatives. But peer means we're eye level. I'm not, before the call I was talking about, or before we started, I'm not an expert. An expert implies hierarchy and a linear kind of structure, whereas most of us know that in indigenous ways and societies, leadership is more in the service and example way of being, and more in a circular way than the linear way. And so when I say to the people that I meet, I've had to develop kind of a sales pitch or a spiel sometimes. Before I came where I'm at, I was actually working in another organization where I was part of a program of community reentry from the jails. And one of the things that we offered, it was geared around employment, was CRM, recovery mentor, or peer wellness training. And a lot of the questions are, what is peer support? And so I developed my own spiel. Basically, I would emphasize to the person that, number one, I had at one time sat on the other side of the glass, so to speak. And but more than anything, I wanted to emphasize that they are the authority and the expert on their own life and recovery. And I see a hand. Jessica.
Oh, I just go ahead and finish, Jim. I just wanted to say something when you were done.
Okay. So, but meeting people where they're at, and supporting them on the pathway that they choose. Now, having worked in Indian country for a while, I've learned that I'm not there to teach anybody about culture. I can only share my experience, my lived experience. I'm not there to certainly push my culture. I learned this really quickly when I went to work for a tribal organization in Oklahoma, and started working with some of the elders there on a project, and very quickly was kind of schooled on this is our way. While there are similarities, this is our way. So I'm certainly not the expert on culture. And what I've learned is some people, even though they may be native, aren't really interested in learning their culture or their language. So my path is to my part is to support them in that. I have had peers who did not want to stop using or drinking. I've had to support them in that path. And, you know, so anyway, I don't give mandates. I don't even use words like compliance in my progress notes. And I certainly, although I'm sure I do, I try to avoid giving advice. So what I do is I share my story and what worked and didn't work. And I believe in that way where there's no top-down hierarchy, no mandates, that what we do as peer supporters in Indian country is consistent with Indigenous values. So Jessica, would you?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I always love hearing you talk, and so does my cat. You'll see my cat gets really excited whenever Jim talks and comes up on my desk and starts colonizing my workspace. So you will see a tail go by for sure. Yeah, I just kind of wanted to speak a little bit about what Jim put in the slide, which is really important, in that we meet folks where they're at. Right. And I often find, especially around when I did peer support, when I do peer supervision, I think oftentimes what is really hard to accept is that recovery for specific folks looks different, right? What looks like recovery for me might be different from what looks like recovery for somebody else. Learning that peer support isn't necessarily about the outcome. Seeing good outcomes is great. Having a peer that you're supporting or a relative that you're supporting and supporting them to, you know, to live their best life is fantastic. And that's kind of what keeps you going in this job. But that isn't necessarily success for a peer support specialist. Success for a peer support specialist is truly being beside someone and supporting them in what they need in that moment, right? Which doesn't always line up with what we want to see for somebody else. And so what I constantly find myself saying when I'm doing peer supervision with folks is, you cannot own the outcome, right? That outcome is going to come from that person inside that person. Right. And as long as we are there to support that person, regardless, we're there to hold hope for them until they can hold hope for each other. We're there to help that individual see their worth because we see worth in them. That's all we can do. Right. Otherwise, we start wading into the waters of exactly, Steve. Otherwise, we start wading into those waters of being a therapist or being a counselor. And then what makes us any different? What makes us different, number one, is that we have lived experience, right? I worked with Jim in that reentry program. I've been to jail probably 50 times in my life. Right. So being the person who's administering this program for people who are reentering, it's really important that I have that lived experience. Right. And right, you're not always going to be able to see the outcome. What we can do is we can plant seeds. So I really think it's important to remember that your worth as a peer support specialist, your how successful you are, is about how well you were able to support somebody and not necessarily the outcome, although we all want to see a great outcome. Jim?
Thank you, Jessica. That basically, we could probably end right now, and that would be the essence of what peer support is, basically. So, but could we have the next slide, please, Steve?
Thank you for joining us, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Okay. I decided I'm using this particular slide in another presentation I'm doing next month. And I debated on whether or not to put it in here because I think that a lot of us here are probably aware of this already. But I also have worked in, every organization I worked in, we serve both native and non-native people. We serve the whole community. And in the case of one particular workplace, my immediate supervisors were non-native, and we would get a lot of questions about culture. And as I say, that a lot of folks, when they think of native culture, and number one, we know that there is no one native culture, that our cultures are varied and rich and diverse, and I love learning about the other cultures, and and there's a lot of similarities, but there are many different cultures of our ways. And of course, I do participate in Wellbriety movement, which is, I guess, for practicality, is whether it's what they call pan-Indian. But most of the time, when folks that aren't familiar with our different cultures, when they think of culture, they think of powwows, fry bread, and maybe sage or smudging. But I really, in my experience, believe that integrate, I can never say that word, cultural healing into our work. We need to, or I don't want to say
Oh, Jim, you're breaking up a little
should
bit.
probably go far deeper than the stereotypical images. As I've heard, superficial practice brings superficial healing. So, and I just wanted to bring that up. That little image is pretty, descriptive. And what most people see is just that tip of the iceberg. And, but there's a lot of things to consider when working in our communities. We each have our own individual worldviews, both collectively and individually. We have our oral traditions, which I find the more I learn about my own people's oral traditions, is just it's amazing. There's no limit to how deep we can go with and our histories, both our pre-contact and our post-contact histories, and everything. Family, how we approach our family and community networks, our extended family, so to speak. I mentioned my clan at the beginning. In our Haudenosaunee societies, the clan is actually the family, and not just our immediate family of our mom and dad and so forth and so on. So, yeah, I have an unstable connection. So if I do cut out, Jessica, if I have to jump off and reconnect, please jump in.
Yeah, I have you. Yep. We got
Okay.
this.
Yep. Just let
Anyway.
me know, Jim. Yeah.
Okay. I could change networks right now, but that would interfere. So I've had this issue before. Trying to keep a good mind so I won't think about Xfinity or Comcast. So
It might. Sometimes it helps too to if you want to shut your camera off, Jim. That might.
I'll try that. You're all
Preserve.
probably tired of looking at me anyway. So anyway, could we have the next slide, please? Okay, as I said, peer support is consistent, at least in my experience, consistent with Indigenous values. And I want to just share some oral history of my own people about how individual liberty is highly valued in our societies. We didn't dictate to people how they were to believe or think or pray or even act. I mean, we have our, I guess, moral compass, that so long as their actions didn't harm the community, And if that was the case, of course, there was consequences. And I'm thinking about something that actually is pertinent to my own history. My first recorded male ancestors was a man, a white man that was taken captive as a child. And this happened around 1770. And I've seen the family tree, and it has his name. I think because the church was doing the recording, they didn't mention the mother's name, just Mohawk woman or what have you. But he was taken captive as a child by a man named Logan. And Logan was not a chief. He was a war leader, but he wasn't a chief. And we were, my ancestors were living in the Ohio Valley at that time. And what happened was Logan and some men were out hunting one day, and some settlers invited some of our people, including Logan's family, to trade, and got them drunk and massacred them. And of course, when Logan returned to that, he became mad with grief and rage, and he wanted to exact his revenge. And the clan mothers and the chiefs said, well, you know, we're trying to keep the peace. We'd rather you wouldn't. You didn't do that, but we understand why you feel like you should, and we won't get in your way. And so he did gather a war party and started along what they call the Seneca Trail, raiding all the way from in New York down into West Virginia. And on the West Virginia, Pennsylvania line, he raided a farm and took 2 children captive. And one of them is my first recorded male ancestor. Now, what happened was he started a war. And it was called Lord Dunsmore's War. And when he came back, we know that revenge doesn't address grief. And he began to drink, and he began to cause trouble. But because he was a man of stature, some of the young men still looked up to him. And they were really afraid he would start another war. And one of the clan mothers would send somebody to talk to him and tell him he needed to knock it off. And in those days, the consequences were rather harsh. They ended up sending his own relative to club him. And but where I'm going to that they did not interfere with him when he felt like he needed to do what he needed to do. Only did they interfere with him when it started causing real problems for the community. And ironically, Logan is the ancestor of the man that taught me our language and culture. So, but I just want to stress, and this is going back to the peer relationship of individual liberties, and how important it is to honor a person's beliefs and worldview, and not dictate or impose my own. Jessica.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I agree. I think peer support is consistent with Indigenous values. I have found in my work with different tribes in some other states, while peer support is consistent with Indigenous values, there is still a very big stigma and a lot of barriers to folks with lived experience who may have incurred some criminal charges along the way. This was often one of the hardest conversations I would have. I went and I wrote a peer support specialist training and got it certified through the state of Arizona. And what I did was I just kind of wrote like a peer support training with all of the kind of, you know, your regular peer support information, and was able to get that certified with the understanding that each tribe could take this material and then put their own medicine, their own culture, their own history, their own all of the stuff that was important to them, their own resources. And often what I found was that, you know, there started to be some funding for peer support. So folks wanted this training, but they didn't necessarily want to hire the folks with the lived experience, right? They wanted to hire folks based on their criminal record being clean, or based on them having a lot of education, or, you know, and so I just hope that because this is in line with, you know, Indigenous values, especially around storytelling. You know, I can take somebody else's story and tell it, right? But what good does that do, right? Like when I tell you my story, right? Like I was there. You're going to see it in my eyes. You're going to feel it in your heart. You know, when I look at people, when I look at other people, I'm able to, those folks that, some of those peers that, or relatives that are the hardest, you know, like you want so bad for them to do something and they try and they try and they try and they try. I'm able to look back at my own story and say, you know, I didn't get it the first time or the 5th time or the 10th time, or maybe even the 20th time, you know, and so that helps me stay in that spot of, you never know when it's going to happen, right? And so I just think it's really important that in our communities, we are seeing the value in folks who maybe, and the opportunity for folks to come back into the workforce and to be able to give back to their communities in a way that is important for them and important for their community. So, and I see that there are other folks who say that they have seen that in their communities. And I think it's true. I don't think it's just true in Indigenous communities, but I think sometimes it's especially true, right? You do get stigmatized because of your criminal, you know. Yeah, we would love to hear from you. I think that it is something that we all experience, even, you know, in this, especially in the landscape I'm in today. I share that very sparingly because I'm in administration, but I think it's true for all of us. We've all experienced that. Did you want to share, Martina?
Yes, Martina, I'm interested in hearing more of your experience where you're at, if you are care to unmute.
But no
Sure.
pressure.
No, Jim gives me a lot of pressure. Let's see. Sorry, I'm trying to there we go. Sorry about that. So Canadian Tribe has a new wellness court, and they've started this back in 2007, and we come the first 6 that graduated. They have exceeded our expectations. One of them was picked out to start working with a clinic or a counselor at the chemical dependency, and because of her criminal record, she was not accepted because of her criminal background. And there could be a couple of people that could have been great support, peer support. And because of their criminal background, I was told once by someone over at Behavioral Health that because of their criminal background, we recommend them, but they mentioned that because of their criminal background, they're not going to pass, even if they fill out the what is that word called where they fill out all the paperwork? It starts with a V. I can never remember it. So that is true. It is really hard, and they would be great. They are great in the community. So, yeah.
Thank you, Martina. And I had seen in the chat that Steve had mentioned that Donna has some experience as well, or insights to share if she'd like.
Oh, hi guys. Sorry, I don't have a camera on my computer. I think from my own experience is that we have exceptional compassion, having gone through the system and the stigmas ourselves. For me, I know that being able to meet people where they are without judgment is a huge part of the building rapport, building those connections, making people feel valued without the judgment. So we have a lot of work to be done as far as trying to get Western understanding to move over to our side or become less judgmental. I do work with some of the most educated people, and I have had to say to some of those folks that you may be more educated than me, but certainly you are not smarter than I. So as far as compassion and having the healing heart, the compassion for those who are still suffering and be able to sit in silence with those. The hardest part for many Western trained folks is they want to change their uncomfortable space of silence. And many times when you can sit with others in silence, they begin to find a place and space with you to bring a starting point to change the journeys that they're on. So I'm a firm believer in the amount of time that it takes and the insurance companies dictating you get X amount of sessions and then you must move on, which absolutely doesn't work for any system. And the grateful thing about working in the Native organization is that thus far, we can keep them as long as they need to be here healing. So thanks for letting me add that.
Thank you, Donna. And thank you, Martina. And I just saw in the chat, I had brought up when Martina was trying to figure out what word she was going to use. I thought of record expungement. And I do know that within that reentry program that Jessica and I have mentioned, that was actually part of the program. And I do know that one county, in fact, I saw it on social media this morning, one county north of me has a record expungement program. But in my own experience, I freely share that, yes, I have a history of, shall we say, criminal activities. And actually, when I talk to folks like my peers or when I'm meeting somebody for the first time, when they ask me what my education is, you know, I have a high school diploma. I have some college in a totally unrelated field. But what qualifies me to do what I do is that lived experience. I like to say that I have a PhD in the school of life. And so I really, that lived experience is so valuable in peer support. And it doesn't mean that other aspects of behavioral health can't utilize that as well, but I think it is especially important when we're looking at the value of peer support. And Jessica.
Yeah, thanks, Jim, and thanks for bringing up that the reentry program. That was a program that I was a director at an agency, and we wrote for a grant from the Department of Labor to do some reentry work for folks who were incarcerated. And we put a big chunk of that grant into expungement services because we've been, you know what I mean? And when I looked at all the grantees who had their programs, expungement services might not have even been part of the program that they were administering, right? But because I was at a peer-run agency, and I mean, all of us had been to prison, we understood just how important that was. So I think that shows, again, like when you let folks like us at the table, when you let folks like us into these rooms, into these decision-making processes, regardless, right? You're always going to come out with a better program, right? Because there's nobody, the people who are closest to problem are also closest to the solution, right?
Indeed. Okay, Steve, I think we can move on to the next slide. So once again, now this is a definition of peer support, actually straight out of the Oklahoma Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services. And from here on, for the sake of brevity, I'm going to call them ODOPSIS because that's what we called it down there. But they're peer support training manual. And the thing it mentions under supportive supervision, and we'll get into that in much greater detail and depth at some point. But the peer support specialist provides peer support services from the perspective of lived experience with a substance abuse disorder. Anymore, I don't even like to use the words disorder or what have you, but that's just me, and or a mental health challenge. The PRSS, that's what they call them in Oklahoma, serves as a catalyst to fully engage peers with treatment services, brokering information and resources, and assisting peers with the recovery process through supportive interactions with clinical staff and a variety of community stakeholders. So, for example, I have worked in peer-ran organizations and I've worked in clinical settings. Currently, I work in a clinical setting. And as a lead peer support, more than anything, my role there is to be the bridge between the people that are doing the peer support and the clinical side. Unfortunately, I'm kind of a department of one, so I'm doing direct peer support right now too. So, but it's very important, I think, to help. And it's not a us against them thing. I really want to stress that because my own biases will take me to that place if I very easily, believe me, as Jessica and Steve know. But my biases will take me to that place of being rather militant and radical and combative. But it's important to help, and I have to put those biases aside to help my peers navigate that clinical maze that we encounter sometimes. And so I work with the counselors where I work, as a team. I work with them. And I find by taking that approach, once again, the we instead of the I and the me way of looking at things, taking that approach and working with the clinical staff, we are actually getting some good results for our peers. And also helping them navigate those interactions with community stakeholders, connection to resources and navigating the system, so to speak. It is definitely a challenge sometimes, as most of you probably know. And I just saw in the chat, Yes, that's very true, Monica. Myself, I do not work with youth or children, but I certainly am aware of those things that you mentioned. Next slide, please, Steve.
And just real quick to add on to that, that's a really good point. And I've run into different tribal communities that they just have a rule that they don't, regardless of what they're hiring for, they don't hire anybody with a criminal background.
Mhm.
So I think there are different levels of ways that this advocacy needs to happen, like in multiple facets.
Exactly. Excuse me. So education and experience, and once again, we'll go much deeper into this in the next webinar. But in my experience, what is required to get into entry level, I guess you call it, peer support is a high school diploma or a GED.
Unless you're in the state of Oregon, I don't think that's required.
Oh, I didn't know that. Learn something new every day. Lived experience with substance abuse and or have received mental health services in the past. And a demonstration or participation in and personal knowledge of recovery. Once again, that's going to look different for everybody. I have a personal knowledge of my own recovery. I cannot tell someone what their recovery is supposed to look like. Be willing to self-disclose regarding one's personal and wellness journey. Now there is what I call, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't always disclose my whole story on the first meeting. Be stabilized in recovery and practice ongoing self-care. Now, once again, I want to stress, and this is just for me, that on any given day, I'm not always a marvel of mental health. I have still working through my own personal traumas and working through the collective traumas, the historical traumas, and I'm prone and have had bouts of pretty heavy duty anxiety and depression along the course of my recovery. So I want to really, you know, some of the best peer supporters I know are what conventional society would call crazy. I'll just throw that out there. So, you know, being stabilized in recovery is subjective, I think. And you know, be able to serve as an example to others of what recovery and wellness looks like. And once again, for me, that is also subjective. I know what I want mine to look like, and I try to model that with varying degrees of success on any given day. And I'll be honest, there are some days I should just probably stay home and not talk to anybody. But agree to abide by any code of ethical practices. Every state has its peer ethics code. Most of them are pretty much the same. I've worked in 2 different states, and they're basically the same code of ethics. All boils down to do no harm, basically. Complete the required training for certification in your state and maintain those certification requirements. Those vary from state to state. Once again, I will go deeper into a lot of this during hopefully during the course of this webinar, and especially the next one. And Steve is right, there is no federal or guidelines currently. Here in Oregon, we have what we call a CRM II, which is a certification I have, which would enable me to bill across state lines with it. For example, Washington State. I could provide services up there with the certification. if I wanted to, and actually I'm looking at maybe doing that at some point, but not right now. So I saw some things in the chat. Oh, okay. Steve said he had a poll question at some point. He's asking who in our audience is currently practicing as a peer support specialist. May just raise your hand. Oh, okay. Here's the poll.
I mean, I guess not technically. I think once you're a peer, you're always practicing peer.
Yeah, true.
I probably didn't word that right, but just thought maybe we could get a sense too, Jim, to see who's currently practicing, and we'd love to hear from you guys too. Those of you that are in the trenches, so to speak, you know. But there's our poll. That's everybody coming in. So we're about looks like about 40% of you are currently actively working as peer recovery support specialists. So thanks for participating in that.
Good question, Steve. Pretty close, I'm seeing. About 60-40 roughly.
Yeah.
And a little bit, and Jessica can help me out. This just came to me about the actual history of peer support, you know, and it started as a grassroots movement.
Yeah, you want me to take? So
Yeah.
I think like we can look back. I mean, like really, if you really want to look back, I think peer support has been happening in some form or another since time immemorial, right? I mean, people sharing story to support people in learning is a tenet of Indigenous cultures across the globe, right? But if we're looking at like the peer support movement in like your Western context, yeah, so it started as the CSX movement, the consumer survivor ex-patient movement. And the reason why it's called that is because they're like, again, just like anybody else, peers are not a monolith, right? And people had some feelings. This was like in the 60s, 70s. So essentially what happened was, for a very, very long time, you kind of just got locked up in a hospital, right? And once you lost your liberty to get, and this is more around mental health, right? You got locked up in a hospital, you kind of lost your liberty, and then maybe you didn't get out. And so what happened through the 60s, 70s, and especially in the 80s, I don't know if anybody remembers Ronald Reagan, right? They kind of shut down all of the psychiatric hospitals. And so folks were coming out of those psychiatric hospitals, maybe not having, like, you might have been like crazy Aunt Jessica that they put away in a hospital and nobody, you know, and nobody talked to. So a lot of folks were coming out of those very institutionalized, and it wasn't just for psychiatric stuff. You could get put away for being a drunkard, right? Back in the day. So these folks started coming out, and while the kind of the promise from the government, right? We all know how government promises go, was, okay, we're going to shut down these hospitals, right? We're going to give all these bridge services. Well, the bridge services didn't really come, right? And so kind of out of a need, right? These folks started creating these networks that would just support each other. Like, okay, I've come out of the state hospital. I understand what services are out there. And it just kind of became organic. I think there was another aspect of some of those folks also started going to AA and NA. I don't know if there was NA back then, but you know, those kind of 12-step programs. And so if you look at peer support, what we call peer support today, it's kind of a hybrid of what you would see in that kind of having a sponsor, like an AA sponsor, NA sponsor, in that person is there to support you through your journey, and a little less directive, right? And that's kind of where that CSX movement comes in. So it's kind of like a hybrid some different modalities, or I'm sorry, some different types of support that had occurred over some decades. But essentially, these people were coming out of, being, essentially having their liberty taken and saying, hold on, like, we're people too. And so it really started a lot around the civil rights movement and folks wanting to, be seen as humans. That's a very abridged version of that.
Right. But that's pretty much it in a nutshell. Thank you, Jessica. So, of course, it's evolved over the years. And I got something from a friend of mine who's a peer supporter here in Oregon about, in some ways, that evolution hasn't always been, I guess, favorable to both the peer supporters or the peers. So, and that's what I mean when I talk about indigenization or decolonization, if you will, that once it became a billable service, in some ways, the peer movement's been co-opted. And Jessica has her hand up again. So
sorry, no, that's a really good point, Jim. I think, especially in the early 2010s is kind of when you started to see SAMHSA really buy in, like the late 2000s, early 2010s, you start to see SAMHSA really buying into peer support, and they started funding these technical assistance centers, and they funded 5 of them across the United States, and I was actually the director of one of them for regions 9 and 10 of SAMHSA. And there was a lot of conversation in the peer world about, once you take money from the government, you've kind of sold out, right? And so there was kind of that push-pull. But also, once you accept money from the government, I think we all kind of know this, it comes with some stuff, right? Now, all of a sudden, you have to provide services in the way that the government wants you to provide them. I think luckily, I think we're pretty fortunate around peer support. If you look at SAMHSA's role and scope of peer supporters and their definition of recovery, I think it's pretty good. They also do have the person who's now the director of peer services at SAMHSA is a peer, right? Which is pretty huge to have a peer in a government role at a federal agency like that. I am also a peer in a government role in a state agency. So I know how hard that is to happen, and that I'm probably the only one in the room in most rooms I'm in. So I do give some credit to SAMHSA for at least trying. And obviously they're the sponsor here. So way to go, SAMHSA.
I think SAMHSA's been a great ally to us, myself, and they actually, I can't remember what it's called, but on their website, they have a little card that you can print about culture. I can't remember. Some of you may see, I'll have to find it, but it's a very good little card or pamphlet. Next slide, please, Steve. All right, so we've touched on this once again. Jessica will touch more into this, but what we call CEUs, maintaining your certifications, basically vary from state to state, but all states require continuing education to maintain certification. And so depending on what state you're in, consult your state certifying board, or here in Oregon, boards, and find out what those required number of CEUs are. So it just varies from state to state. Next slide, please. Okay, so examples of the work that we do, and this is just, the more I look at this, it's so hard to just boil down what we do into a few sentences.
Jeremy's on.
You know, some of the things that once again that I gleaned from both the Odomsis and the Southern Plains manuals were be role models of recovery and wellness, you know, and basically be that living example that recovery is possible. And other people are often examples of that to me as well. I just want to point out, last week, it was a rough week for me at my work. I won't go into it, but it was very taxing emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. And Friday is like, you know, I told my supervisor, so I'm about ready to just throw in the towel this week and go home. And I got a call from the front desk saying somebody was there to see me. And it was a young fellow who I had provided peer support to early on in my tenure of where I'm currently at. And they had some legal things to take care of and went away for a while. And they showed up on Friday telling me they had like 16 months clean. They just got a job. They're getting to see their kids. And that's what makes this worthwhile to me. In fact, I get really emotional about stuff like that, you know, about the time, and you'll encounter this, regardless of whether you're a therapist, a counselor, a case manager, peer support, whatever you do, it's so easy sometimes to get discouraged. And I myself need those examples. You know, I need people to show up and say, hey, this is where I'm at now. And, you know, I don't want to take any credit, but, you know, you played a small part in that. So I think we need that kind of validation for ourselves as people that do the work as well. And we need to validate and support each other as well. You know, Jessica.
Yeah, I think that also, again, lends to the fact that we need peers supervising peers. We need people with a lived experience of being a peer supervising peer support specialists. You know what I mean? Because often you're going to go stretches without having that success story, and it can beat you down, right? I think that's what you're speaking to, Jim, is, you know, and it can feel really defeating, even though we're not supposed to tie our success to outcomes. Like when you really, you know, grow to work with somebody and grow to care about somebody, like, you know, there is no way to totally externalize this, right? And I think it's just further evidence that we need folks in as peer support specialists. We need folks around us that understand what it is like to be a peer and can provide that supervision, but can also provide that ear and that understanding that comes with having been there.
Exactly.
I wish we had a peer supervisor, Jim. I'm so sorry.
Just so you know, I'm breaker anonymity. Jessica used to be my supervisor.
Oh, yes.
So.
Yes. Well, you know, it's a funny story. So I maybe this is outside the scope, but I just think it's funny. So I worked at a peer run nonprofit in Portland, Oregon, and was asked to do the Southern Plains Echo, right? And I met Jim. And Jim was talking about how he wanted to leave Oklahoma, or maybe he was thinking about leaving Oklahoma one time in a meeting. And I was like, you want a job? And that's how Jim came to Oregon.
Like I said, you never know where the journey is going to take you. So, other work that we do, or things that we do, outreach and engage peers, you know, I love doing outreach in the community. It's very important in engaging stakeholders. And actually, the reason I have the job that I have now is when I was working at the organization that Jessica just mentioned, I was tasked with doing some outreach in the urban native community up there, and ended up getting asked if I wanted a job where I'm at now. So, but outreach, I love doing outreach, and also engage peers by orientating them to services. And they're just in a clinical setting. I do assist with completing screenings and intakes sometimes, not in a clinical sense, but basically I've turned that into, I was asked, because some days we get really busy with intakes and there's limited staff. And so I was asked, can peers help with that? And I kind of made it into, here you got this person that's showing up wanting services, and they're being barraged with all these intakes, clinical, what have you. And I make it into a kind of a meet and greet, is what I've done with that intake process. And so coach on effective coping techniques and self-help strategies, assist people in articulating their personal recovery goals and brainstorming the objectives needed to reach them. I always stress to my peers that this is a team effort. Empower folks by promoting autonomy, self-direction, and self-advocacy. That's very, I think, one of the most empowering. It's very empowering for me to watch somebody come into their own power, I guess is a good way to put it, and access their own personal power. And I really believe, I don't believe, I know from personal experience that accessing our ancestral ways, our ancestral knowledge that we carry, is accessing power. And I've experienced it in my own life, and I've seen other people experience it when they start to access that ancestral knowledge, and so forth and so on. And share knowledge of resources, what have you. I'm always learning, and this is not my specialty. I'll be honest with you. I really dislike dealing with Social Security Administration and the DHS. But if I dislike it and I have some experience, just think how intimidating that is to our peers. So, and once again, it's like I tell them, well, this isn't no fun for me, but maybe together we can navigate this, So, and it can be a trigger. And once again, it's a trigger for me in late recovery, if you want to know the truth, Steve. I have an intense distaste for bureaucracy, but I have to set that aside in order to help my peers navigate that. Yes, Jessica.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think everybody here has made really good points. I know at the organization that I used to work at, some of the most successful programs that we had were helping parents in family court and go through the maze that is DHS here, oftentimes, and advocate, oftentimes when, you have a DHS case or something is going on, you are just bombarded with, I remember once I was supporting a parent who was being asked to engage in therapy at a specific time of day, have a job, do all of this stuff, and they were getting around on the bus, right? And so what we did was we eventually got to the point where, in both drug and family court, where the prosecuting attorney and kind of the attorney that's representing the folks and the judge, they would have conferences beforehand. Like there was also a peer there to say, okay, logistically, Do you know how long it takes the number 9 bus to get from here to here? Like, let's really look at this. And I can't tell you, like, that program was so successful in advocating for those parents and helping those parents be successful, because a lot of times the system is not set up for success, right? And you have to be really savvy to get through it. And it really helps if you have somebody who's been through it before and can help advocate and know who to advocate to. So I think that's a really good point, especially when you're talking about these big systems that were not necessarily set up for success.
Indeed. I was just looking at some of the comments, and something that Dave said, I love this. Our pay is watching someone get it. And once again, that is probably on the weeks that I had myself last week, the thing that keeps me going. So next slide, please, Steve. And I'm going to just boil this down. Peer support is reciprocal. And I stress that as well. I have had, like I said, I have my days that where I kind of have to fake it, you know, put on the game face and go through it. And I often tell my peers that maybe they don't know it, but sometimes it's almost like we switch seats sometimes, and they're lifting me up. And I just want to, you know, just reinforce that idea that this is not about a hierarchy. It is reciprocal, it's circular. And, you know, peer support is the process of giving and receiving non-clinical assistance to achieve long-term recovery, whether it be from severe psychiatric, traumatic, or addiction challenges. And so the support is provided by peer supporters. And I'll give you a good example. We have a peer where I work who has put together some substantial, what we call clean time, I guess. And they have expressed a desire to become a peer supporter. And just so happens, the other organization I used to work for has a program called Project Peer. And it involves training and what have you, and then an internship. Well, this person just started their internship at a local hospital as a peer. And I cannot tell you how much joy it gives me to see that happen and to watch this person come alive and find a purpose and direction and meaning and depth and weight in their life. So I saw that you had your hand raised, Jessica.
No, I think you covered it. I think it's also part of always being teachable and a mind frame of understanding that no matter what room I'm in, I can always learn something. You know, I don't have to be in a classroom. I don't have to be in a supervision. I don't have to be anywhere but just sitting with another human being to learn something. And I've found sometimes in some of the hardest situations I've been in, what I'm learning about is myself. You know, especially in those really difficult situations, like if I have a peer screaming at me, or if, you know, I'm finding myself getting lost in the sauce. Like what I'm really learning about there sometimes is I'm learning about me, and I'm learning how I can respond to situations. So I think just taking all of this as an opportunity to learn and grow is the reciprocal part sometimes. Like I think Jim is right. Like sometimes it's just, you know, being with and supporting somebody who helps like sustain your desire to continue to do the work, because it can be hard to sustain that, right? I mean, we have to be honest here. It can be really hard to sustain that desire, especially in roles like this. And it can also be just learning about yourself and how you respond and how you could respond, and how to keep yourself safe and as sane as possible. I mean, like, I would never call myself sane, but I try. So yeah.
Exactly. I think it's all relative as to what that word means sometimes. Next slide, please. So I've touched on this before, culturally relevant peer services, and that phrase culture is prevention. You will hear that across Indian country. And I guess in that sense, sometimes culture is treatment and culture is peer support, because culture involves mutuality and shared visions. Also want to I heard one of our other colleagues who I mentioned later on in this webinar, we were talking about bringing culture into our work. And he said it really succinctly, it's not necessarily about going around wearing regalia or burning sage or what have you. Bringing culture into our work is what he said is just being kind. When the first colonizers came to this hemisphere, one of the first thing they noticed is the kindness of the people they encountered. So to me, more and more, it is not about being what have you. I don't know. I am definitely not any icon of culture, but more and more, it's just about being kind, being what we call in our way, putting on that good mind and taking it to wherever I go. So, and also is proven to be relapse prevention and healing. And so more than anything, and this is what I want to bring into my work, especially working with folks that are, come from a different tribe or different culture than I am. It's more about an encouragement to learn about and participate in your nation's culture, learn language. I often say, if the only word that you can learn to say in your language is thank you, that's prayer. And so even though the roles are going to vary from setting to setting, but there's some common activities that we'll look at. But more and more, I just want to stress that it's about bringing that what we call Ongwehowe Naha, a way of being, into the work that we do. And like I said, I'm able to do that with varying degrees of, I guess, success. So, and I do want to stress that tribal facilities often modify or expand their activities to reflect their cultural beliefs, values, and traditions. And it's important to remain humble and teachable, and especially if I'm working for a tribe other than my own. I never, and I learned this lesson, never presume to teach my culture. Share it, but don't teach it. And one thing I really is asked to learn about the local culture and bring in elders and as consultants or advisors and work with their tribe, whatever the tribe's cultural preservation department. Invaluable resources in the work that we do with our people. Next slide, please. So once again, supporting recovery. So how does that look? How does that play out in our relationships with our peers? Mutuality and not hierarchy. I say that over and over and over again. And a lot of that comes with I have a huge aversion to hierarchy in authority that's got me in trouble at times. But I really do not want to be an authority figure to anybody. I found that is really, I guess, taken my ego out of it. Man, it has caused me immense grief in relationships in the past of wanting to be somebody or present myself as being somebody. And I have a little bit of a background of some activism, and I've seen what that havoc that has caused in our movements as well. So mutuality and not hierarchy, advocacy, strategic storytelling. That's the word I was searching for earlier when I was talking about self-disclosure. There's a time and a place to disclose certain things and to motivate. And that more and more, I don't even really care for the term mentor, even though I've had some good mentors and teachers, because that seems to me to conflict with the concept of mutuality and having a non-hierarchical structure. So once again, this is just me, doesn't mean I'm right or that I am an expert. But this is just me and how I approach things. So next slide, please. And going deeper into that mutuality and not hierarchy. Our relationship between a peer supporter and the peer is one of mutuality. The peer supporter, and once again, just speaking for me, I'm not the expert nor the authority. I don't issue directives. I try to avoid using words like should or you need to. And there are no punitive measures given. And yes, Jessica.
Oh, go ahead and finish. I just wanted to say something about this.
Okay. So too often, I just had last week, one of my peers had missed a meeting that we had set up, and first thing they said is, "I'm not going to get in trouble, am I?" You know, and I said, "No, banish that thought from your head. Let's just try to keep when we agree to meet, let's just try to keep that. If you can't, all I ask is call me and let me know." You know, and if I can't keep my end of it, I'll let you know as well. And that, to me, that's mutuality in its really simple sense. So services aren't based on compliance, right? And the peer engages as much or little as they please, as well. So you hear the term "nothing about us without us," and that goes back to how the grassroots element that Jessica was speaking of earlier. And I've encountered this actually in the setting I'm at now, where they'll have a clinical meeting and make decisions about peer supporters without none of us there. And I was quick to point that out. And now when there are such meetings, I'm there. So anyway, no decisions are made for the peer without them present. You know, and they are the authority of their own life in their own recovery journey. So anyway, Jessica, yes.
So I'm going to take the opportunity right now when we're talking about mutuality and no decisions are made for the peer and nothing about us without us, to talk to you a little bit about motivational interviewing and peer support. Often in peer support trainings, they teach the tenets of motivational interviewing. And I think motivational interviewing is great, depending on the time and place, right? What I often see happen is that peers learn about motivational interviewing in a way that is more clinical than it is peer driven. And so if you are using motivational interviewing as a peer support specialist, I think it's really important to keep at the forefront, nothing about us without us, right? When we're looking for, kind of the discrepancy between what somebody says they want and what they're doing, right? We need to ensure that we are constantly checking in with our peer and understanding if so. We try to keep this as peers. We need to keep these relationships as close to this as possible. I don't know if you could see me in my little box, right? It's never going to be here because we're getting paid to do the work, right? So it's never going to be completely mutual, right? But we try to take that hierarchy down, right? And so although that is how you can use motivational interviewing to sell cars. As a matter of fact, a lot of people do. So there is a way it can be used for good or, whatever. So we try to keep it as close to here as possible, right? That isn't always our peers' experience of professionals, right? And peers are professionals. So your peer may or may not, but they may, and it happens a lot. They come in and they tell you what they think you want to hear, because that's usually how they interact with professionals, right? That's kind of the way that a lot of folks have learned to adapt and get through what they need to get through. Right. And so they might come in and tell you, so I'm going to give you a story. I usually tell through telling story or teach through telling stories. So one of the very first peers I ever had was a houseless individual in the county that I was providing peer support in. And, we got this individual a phone and we had scheduled our first meeting. We're going to meet in this coffee shop and I was going to buy the coffee and we were going to chat. And I went in there ready, armed with all of my resources to find this person a place to live. And I was feeling myself. I put on my cape and I was going to save the day and everything was going to go great. And I was going to find this person a place to live. Well, this person never called me back, right? Didn't really want to have anything to do with me. Might answer and be like, no, I'm good. Well, when I finally get them to agree to meet with me, they were very vocal, thankfully, because I learned a big lesson from this, is they didn't want a place to live, right? They just wanted a tent, right? And here I was trying to get them into transitional housing because that was my value. I would want a place to live. Therefore, I assumed that this person would want a place to live. And it didn't even dawn on me that they were completely happy doing their thing, right? They just didn't want to get rained on because we live in Oregon and it rains all the time, right? So it didn't even dawn on me. And I learned a very valuable lesson there. And so nothing about us without us is absolutely the administrators who make programs and the supervisors who supervise us. But we need to remember that for the peers that we're supporting, right? And so I just want to ensure that if we are practicing motivational interviewing, that we are doing so with that individual's goal in mind. And we're checking in all the time to ensure that that is truly what their goal is. And what I would normally do if there was a discrepancy between what somebody was saying they wanted and what they were doing, rather than engaging in like a full-on MI motivational interview, right? I would just be like, hey, is this still what you want to do? And if not, that's cool, right? If you want to change your goal, absolutely. But so I just want to give that as as an aside here, because I think it's really important that we're really cognizant that we are not, determining what a good outcome for someone else is, and we're allowing them to do that themselves.
Exactly. And that brings to mind a recent experience of a certain peer who different teams had gotten together and discussed about getting into treatment. And I brought up, did anybody ask this person what they want to do? And I was tasked with doing that. And that was my first question is, where would you like to go from here? And it wasn't treatment, so yeah, it's very important, I think, to bear that in mind. So next slide, please. And I'm going to kind of race through a lot of these now. Once again, advocacy. You know, my role as an advocate is to listen and to understand the peers' wishes and worldview, and to support them to speak for themselves or with their permission to speak on their behalf. Advocacy supports self-determination and personal autonomy. And once again, as peer supporters working in tribal communities, we can advocate for cultural and traditional approaches to recovery and integrating those methods with the conventional methods can ensure that our peers receive holistic services and to be able to weave the threads of their own cultural identity into their recovery. And this is important to me because through the boarding schools and the other forms of forced assimilation, our identities were taken. And a major component of recovery, at least in my own personal journey, has been the recovering of that identity. I mentioned my name at the beginning of my introduction. I felt when I was given that name at 26 years into my recovery, at the age of 56, I was the oldest baby that got named that day. I came into my own and as to who I am as what we call Ongwehoweh, as the original beings. So it's important to me, I think, to advocate for those cultural methods in our work. Next slide, please. Strategic storytelling. As Jessica touched on earlier, storytelling and oral histories are living, breathing traditions among our people. And not only do we have our creation and origin stories, when I worked for a tribe in Oklahoma and I hadn't been there very long, and one of my coworkers took me out to the complex to meet people, and we went in this little office. It was the records office, and there was a couple of sisters in there. They were kind of the elders and the matriarchs of the whole tribe. And I introduced myself, and one of them took 2 hours telling me the tribe's origin story. You know, and I can't tell you how much I appreciated that, to be able to, I mean, what an honor. But but we have our family and tribal histories as well, and our personal stories. And so to me, that strategic storytelling means knowing when and where to share my story and how much to disclose. And a good cultural example is, you know, amongst, I know with our Haudenosaunee people, we only tell certain stories during the winter time when there's snow on the ground. And the reason we do that is if we tell a story about a certain animal in the summer and that is probably in hibernation, we don't want them to think it's time to wake up. So anyway, so a lot of that storytelling and the work that I do also involves sharing that lived experience, of course, and I like to do it in stories. And yes, I think it's common amongst probably our people in the northern part of the continent where we have long winters where we only tell certain stories in the winter time. So another thing I want to say about telling stories for me is that it empowers and encourages a peer by establishing a connection and letting them know that recovery is possible. And it also requires me to take down my armor and be vulnerable sometimes, you know. A lot of times we see, in fact, a friend of mine, you see these old photographs on social media of Native people and everybody just looks so stoic, you know, and I think that we've learned to be that way to protect ourselves, but sometimes I have to take down that armor. So, and also storytelling helps to reduce the stigma that so many of us carry around, whether it be our criminal backgrounds or what have you, or what have you. You know, it just lets somebody else know that as in the words of one of my early AA sponsors, he said, there's nothing that you've done that I haven't either done or thought about doing. So, and that is so true a lot. Next slide, please. I will start paying attention to the time. So humor, yeah, and definitely laughter is medicine. So I'm just going to kind of race through these. I believe that for myself, I motivate more through being that example and telling stories. And I won't go into all of this. We're running short of time. And I do want these slides to be available for folks who would like them as well, Steve. So next slide, please. Community in our native tribal communities. Community is so important, and a healthy community is so important to be able to, you know, wrap our arms around a person. And but we can only heal the community if we heal ourselves and break the cycles of trauma and addiction and abuse and lateral violence, lateral oppression, which is a huge thing amongst many of our communities. I like what a friend of mine says, instead of lateral violence, let's practice lateral kindness and start to heal those cycles. And as Don Coyas, who is the founder of the White Bison Organization, the Wellbriety Movement, he says that culture is the therapy, but the community is the therapist. And I love that. I love that. So when we are able to come together as a healthy community and build healthy communities, so often we see, you know, we're talking about sending somebody off to treatment. So often they come back to the same old thing, especially on the res, you know, and so it's really important that we get the families into the healing, we get the community into the healing, and we have wraparound services for the folks that are coming back from going away to treatment. Going away to treatment is, we send people away to treatment all the time, but they come back to the same old thing. And it's important, especially as peer supporters, and we're out in the community, to be able to connect people to that healing, as Don Coyas calls it, the healing forest. So next slide, please. So, and this, I want to credit to a colleague, Jason Butler, who works with the Shoshone Bannock at Fort Hall in Idaho. And what can we do in the community as peer supporters? Number one, we're mostly members of the community, and we're able to promote culture while getting around ethical barriers. I had a peer in Oklahoma that I would go pick up, and what we would do, we go fishing. That's what we would do. Sometimes I put on a music like stomp dance music, and we drive around and listen to that or what have you. But fishing, gardening, we've got a garden going at where I work now. We had a garden where I worked in Oklahoma. Gathering medicines. There's a peer-ran organization in Portland that when folks come and they have community service to do, they go out and harvest medicines. And cultural activities and crafts. I do want to mention that I've had to kind of educate certain folks that some of our ways are not just crafts, you know, like making moccasins. Moccasins are more than just shoes to many of us, or what have you. So anyway, that's some of the things that we can do as peers. So, and definitely humor. I used to know a guy in AA say, "We'll laugh at you till you can laugh at yourself." No, but and I do know one thing. I've in engaging with my own community back home in Oklahoma, I definitely had to develop some thick skin. So, next slide, please. So, just touching real quickly on historical and intergenerational trauma. I've seen it. I didn't even know such a thing existed until I was well into my own recovery. As I stated, I felt like something was really wrong with me. I didn't know about the removals of my ancestors from the Ohio Valley to Indian Territory. I didn't know about my grandpa's boarding school experiences. I didn't know that was why none of his kids, including my mother, were taught the language. You know, my mother was boarding school survivor as well. And I didn't know why she was always sad or bitter. And so it's very important to be aware of that within our communities. And to me, these are the root of everything that we see, whether it be substance use, behavioral health and mental health challenges, violence, domestic violence, gang activity, what have you, all goes back to these traumas. And so I think it's important to acknowledge these and educate, but also not to get caught up in the trauma itself. And you know, the fact that I carry trauma is really not licensed for me to treat other people badly or what have you. So next slide, please. And
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say, did anybody else glance at that and think that Duran came up with that study? Oh, sorry. All right. Humor.
oh, okay. Yeah, I was just trying to race through these. I think you know, that we can get into this. We don't have time to really get into these things in depth. So I think at this time, let's just stop the slides. And if we have anybody that wants to make some give some last minute insights, I see, is that, okay, I thought I saw a hand up, never mind.
I had a quick poll too, Jim. I was going to try with the audience just to see what barriers they face or have faced in accessing peer recovery, credentialing, and that kind of thing. If that's okay, I could launch this poll.
Okay. Okay, I'm watching the poll now. Access to trainings, I'm seeing, is one of the bigger barriers.
Yeah, that seems to be jumping out. We've got about 50 folks coming in on this poll.
So maybe building on that, what can we do nationally, especially amongst our tribal communities and tribal behavioral health organizations, to promote access to trainings? As I mentioned, in Oklahoma, they have rolled out a Native specific peer support training starting this month. And at some point, one will be rolled out here in Oregon. I don't know what's available in other states. Some don't know about it, lack of knowledge or lack of promotion that these services exist. That's very true. I've seen it take off in Oklahoma and here in Oregon. And I'm seeing on our peer echo that now we're having some folks from Arizona and what have other states join. Where in the past it was primarily Oklahoma and Oregon. But so I'm just going to say this. If this particular webinar and the one coming up have been motivational and inspiring to you, spread the word. Spread the word about peer support. And you don't have to be a peer supporter. You can be a peer ally. We need allies as well. So spread the word. And somebody had asked about when the next webinar will be. When is the second session?
Yeah, we'll
When it-
broadcast part 2. I believe it's April 17. I think we set this up so that if you registered for part 1, you may already be registered for part 2, but just in case, there'll be an announcement coming out that first Monday in April to remind everyone if they're interested in attending part 2. And we'll continue some conversations around peer recovery support services in Native communities.
And I'm actually going to put my personal, I'm not going to put my work email, but my personal email in the chat as well.
Can I just say something real quick, y'all? I really appreciate being invited into this space. This is the first time I've done anything with this group, and I've really enjoyed it. I think Steve has my email if anybody's interested in asking me a question or whatever. I'm here for it. I have to jump. I have 2 minutes until my next meeting, and I have to go be a human just for like 1 minute, grab some water. So I really appreciate you. Thank you so much for letting me be here. And please reach out if you need anything. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Jessica. Okay, as I said, my personal email is in the chat. Feel free to reach out. What I found, one of the great things about Zoom, and Jessica mentioned it back when we first went to this platform, has been a great way to network and build relationships. And yes, Steve, I would like to end things in a good way. If anybody, I feel like I've talked way too much this during the course of the last couple hours, and everybody is probably kind of tired of listening to me, actually. If somebody would like to end us in a good way with some good words. Well, in that case, I will end with once again a huge, as we say, Nyawagoa, big huge thank you. Nyawagoa Swagwego. Big huge thank you to all of you for your participation, just for the fact they're taking a few hours out of you. I know we're all busy and taking some time out of your day to participate in this webinar. And I just want to stress that I learned far more knowledge than I impart. So it's an honor to be with you all. And I'll say Yahweh and Onigia in Cayuga. That means until the next time. We don't have a word for goodbye. So
Jim, thank you so much. And to you and Jessica, I look forward to part 2. Please join us April 17th for that broadcast. We'd love to have you back and watch your emails. If you're on our listserv, you'll get a reminder from us. If you can take a few moments to fill out that survey, if you don't do it today, that's fine. I'll talk with Jim about getting you guys a PDF copy of the slides from today, since we didn't quite get through the whole deck, but really appreciate everybody coming on and being part of this today. And Jim, once again, I really enjoyed this, and hope that we can follow up on some of this next month. Until next time, everyone, please stay safe, stay healthy, and most importantly, stay connected. It's really important. So thank you again, Jim, Yahweh. I appreciate you, big brother, and see you guys again real soon. Bye.
okay. If it's springtime happening where you're at, get out there and get some. So Onigiha.